Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to the CRAM podcast. CRAM is an acronym for Communicating Research and More, which is what we try to do on this podcast. A lot of exciting research and groundbreaking ideas never reach the public, but they have the potential to change the way we think and act. Many of us dream of finding our one true love. It's that one person who's our soulmate, our better half, our destiny. And when we think we found that person, we often marry. Maybe we have children, and we dream of spending the rest of our lives together. But what if that one person turned into two, three, or more people with whom you have a serious romantic relationship simultaneously? Polyamory is something Professor Carrie Jenkins thinks about a lot, and she lives with it too. Carrie is a professor of philosophy at the University of British Columbia. She explores the nature of love in her book, What Love Is and What It Could Be. And she joins us. Hello, Carrie.
Hi there.
Can we start off, first of all, how would you define polyamory?
Polyamory is the practice of or openness to multiple simultaneous relationships, romantic relationships. So this is done with everyone's knowledge and consent. So it's not like cheating.
Right. That's important. That's key to this, right? Everybody knows about it. Everybody's good with it, right?
That's right. Yes. Everybody knows and has agreed in advance.
So, you yourself have been and are involved in polyamorous relationships. I'm interested in knowing, what came first? Was it the personal that came first, or was it a professional interest?
It was a personal interest first. So I was in a non-monogamous relationship with my husband starting in 2010-ish. And the actual research component of my project emerged as I started to realize how much of my philosophical training and my ways of thinking could be useful for understanding some of what was happening to me in my personal life and just what I was seeing around me in the cultural attitudes to romantic love.
And is that something that you and your husband had intended even before you got married?
Absolutely. Yes. And even before we were dating, we were having conversations about non-monogamy, and we both thought that it might be a good fit for us. And that was actually part of how we realized that we might be a good fit for one another.
So then why get married in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Why even go there?
Well, we got married because we wanted to celebrate our love and our commitment to one another, the fact that we wanted to share a life forever. And so we wanted to celebrate that in front of all our friends and family members, and sort of make that commitment publicly and formally. In much the same way as I think everybody else who gets married does. It's just that for us, the marriage ceremony didn't include any promise to forsake all others, because we didn't intend to do that. We wanted to have our relationship, our commitment to one another, allow for us to also date and eventually down the line fall in love with other people.
Yeah, I think people, including myself, we're fascinated by that because so many of us have this idea of marriage as being something very traditional, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's just you and the other person. Yeah. I understand you just celebrated your 11th wedding anniversary, right?
Correct.
With your husband. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm curious to know, how would you describe your relationship with your husband and the expectations that each of you have with your marriage?
So we live together. We share our home, our mortgage, our laundry. He is the one who cooks and I am the one who cleans. That's how we distribute our household tasks. We live together like a married couple. We are financially intertwined. We share rides to work and all that sort of thing. Our relationship, our expectation of one another, we expect each other's love and support. We expect to be there for one another, and we expect that to be continuing for the rest of our lives. That's the nature of our marriage.
Okay. And so then how do these other relationships then fit into your lives?
Mm-hmm. In a variety of different ways. So every relationship that I've ever experienced is as unique as the individual in the relationship with me, and of course me. So I have had a long-term relationships that have been the longest one has been 6 years in duration, where I was dating the person, I was seeing the person as a boyfriend. We would meet, every week. I would spend some time at his apartment every week, and we were a couple. We were not an exclusive couple, but we were a couple, as well as my husband and I being a couple. So that was the kind of situation that was going on for about 5 or 6 years. That relationship actually ended, and now currently I'm in 4 relationships, including my marriage, which is its own complicated thing. Just practically
Yeah.
speaking, that's a lot of
Yeah, 4. A lot
time
of people would
management.
say 1 is enough. Like
Yeah,
1 is enough.
I mean, 1 is too many for some people. Some people like to live
Yeah.
singly, and we have this sort of expectation that everybody should want exactly one partner, and more than that is too many, and less than that is not enough. And there's this pressure on single people to find someone, and there's a pressure on me to get rid of some of my relationships.
And how do you find it working right now, being in 4 relationships?
Well, that's relatively new to me. One of my, so my husband, we've been married for 11 years. That's fairly established and stable. One of my other relationships is with someone I met shortly before the pandemic. And so we got to know each other almost like a long distance relationship. Because even though we don't live very far apart, we were getting to know one another at a time where it wasn't possible to physically see one another. During the lockdown and so on. And so we now have a relationship where we're able to see each other now, once a week usually, and we communicate a lot in the rest of our time, online and virtually. The other 2 relationships that I'm in are more recent than that, and this is a surprise to me as much as anything. I'm always interested in meeting new people, but I'm always a bit pessimistic about actually liking people because I'm fussy, and I'm slightly misanthropic, and I don't like humans on the whole. So I'm always very
Really? I don't
surprised
know.
when I
4
find one that I
relationships?
actually
Well,
like.
I think 4 relationships, people would say, I don't know how fussy she is. She found 4 people.
It's 4 in the entire world, so
Some people don't even find 1.
true. It's true. And I mean, part of why I'm able to have these relationships be so successful is I'm not looking for one person to be absolutely everything to me. And I think a lot of people, when they find it difficult to find the one, it's because they're looking for one person who literally can be everything. And to be honest with you, I don't think anyone can be everything to someone. So even people who are monogamous, it's very good for them to maintain healthy relationships with friends, and have good support networks, and family connections and everything. So, in a lot of ways, I think about having multiple partners as a little bit like having more family, having more kin relations. It's just they're not kin that I was born with. This is kinship that I'm creating, relationship that I'm creating with people that I find. But I was surprised because I usually don't expect to like people that much, and now I have 4 people that are very significant, very important people in my life. It's a great problem to have, but
Yeah, and
scheduling is complicated.
well, yeah, for sure. Like the organizational aspect of it, I could
Yeah.
see being quite
Yeah.
a chore. But, and I mean, you've been very open.
Mhm.
As you are now, right? You've been very open about being polyamorous, about having these relationships.
Mhm.
Well, it's not the norm, right? This
No,
is not still not the norm here. No, it's not
no,
in Canada.
it's not.
People may do it, and I should tell you too, the reason why I was even interested in doing this is because I started reading some articles. I noticed there were articles coming up, and there was this sense that these polyamorous relationships were growing, although I'm not quite sure what that's based on. I don't know if there's been a survey done or I couldn't find one. Um, but also, I would just happen to hear of like people I knew or somebody knew someone who was in a polyamorous relationship.
Mhm.
And so I'm just wondering, I mean, do you have any sense at all as to is this growing? You know, how popular are polyamorous relationships in Canada?
So, what I think is happening is that something that's always been quite common is getting more attention. And so, people, I think a lot of people have always been in non monogamous relationships of various kinds, polyamory included. And what's happening is that more of them are starting to talk about it. So, before, you probably knew people who were in these relationships, you just didn't know you knew them. Because they might not be open about it. And I think now what's starting to happen is because there is more conversation about this subject, more people are openly saying, I am polyamorous. There is a little bit more, not enough yet, but a little bit more research starting to happen on how it works and how it impacts people's lives and just how many people are doing it. It's very difficult to get that statistical information because so many people who are polyamorous are not, don't feel safe um,
Hmm.
talking about it and letting people know. So it is hard to get those kinds of statistics. But what I think is happening is I'm not sure that it's becoming more popular, but I think it's becoming less of a secret over time. And I think that's good because things that are secret, relationships that you can't talk to your friends and your family about are more likely to be relationships where abuse could happen, let's say, because nobody's eyes are on that. Nobody's watching out for you in this relationship because they don't know. They're more likely to be relationships that are put under pressure or under stress by the need for secrecy. So it's a lot harder for that relationship to thrive and stay healthy if people have to keep it a secret. So I think this is all
Hmm.
really good. I'm glad we're having this conversation. You know, a lot of the reason why I myself am open about being polyamorous is so that more of these conversations can happen. And that's to me, that's just a really important way that we can make progress on this issue as a society, right? And just
Yeah.
acknowledge something that's really already happening. Right?
But
Everybody
I
watching this probably already knows someone.
right, but you know, I mean, I can understand why um, people want to keep it a secret when something is not considered, you know, quote unquote normal, and
Mm-hmm.
you're at kind of the, you know, the cutting edge of it. It's not easy because it's not considered normal, and
Mm-hmm.
so I can only imagine. I mean, you yourself, when you've come out, what kind of reaction have you gotten?
All kinds. So a lot of people are right to be secret. And I should say this is not a judgment of anyone because some people could lose their jobs, and I'm lucky that my job is secure in that way. A lot of people can lose family. I thought I was going to lose some family members. I had some people very um, experience a very visceral reaction to finding out that I was non-monogamous, and um, you know, I did lose close friends over it. Um, and I also got, the more I talk about this in public and especially in media, I've been receiving more and more hate mail and very obnoxious online comments about my life and my person and all sorts of things that should happen to me. And I'm sure you can imagine what kinds of
Hmm.
names I get called for being in more than one relationship at the same time. Um, so, I mean, all of that happens, but then other people are supportive and my favorite reaction is basically nothing. I want people to be bored. I want people to be bored by polyamory, right? That's my end game. I want to be boring. I don't like being a rebel. I don't want to be a rebel. I want to be able to be who I am, but for that not to feel rebellious.
Yeah, and I guess you know people's reactions to you, it's all tied up with our own notions of what we think love is, right?
Hmm.
What is our own idea of what romantic love is, what it should be
Yeah.
for us, for society, which is, I mean, those are the things that you cover in your book, what love
Right.
is.
And this is
Yeah.
how the idea got started, right? Because people would say to me things like, well, it's not love then that you feel for, let's say, your husband. If you also have feelings for someone else, that's not love. And if you did love Jonathan, you would only have eyes for him. And so I was sort of interested in that kind of statement, right? That this is what love is, and it has to be this way. And my book ended up being called What Love Is and What It Could Be, because I'm interested in what's possible, right? People see things being one kind of way. It's easy to assume it could only be that way. But that's not really true. Romantic love, the way I see it, is actually quite a flexible thing, and it can be practiced and experienced in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole idea of romantic love for for many people who are critical of this kind of love, of a polyamorous love, where are the roots of that kind of romantic love? Where is it coming from that they feel that no, you can only have one person to
Mm-hmm.
love?
So historically, there's a trajectory in the dominant culture of what you might call Western civilization, which is what I'm interested in and what I've been absorbing all my life, which starts with the patriarchal control of women's sexuality and parenthood and reproduction. And that requires, so in order to know that a man's heir is really his own biological child, he needs to know that his wife is monogamous to him and hasn't been having any kind of relations with other men. And because under, sort of broadly speaking, under capitalism, that control of inheritance is really important. That means paternity certainty is really important. And that means women's monogamy is crucial to the whole system working. So then that sort of evolves gradually into women saying, hang on, it's not fair that we have to be monogamous while men are allowed to have multiple mistresses on the side as well as wives. And so eventually we get to the situation we have now where everyone is expected to be monogamous to their partner, to their spouse or spouse-like partner. And that so as I see it, it ultimately has its roots in capitalism and patriarchal control of women. Even now, the way that women are treated for being non-monogamous is very different from the way that men are treated for being non-monogamous. So if you think about the kind of words that a woman might be called for doing that, they aren't really words that we use for men. And we might call a man
Yeah,
a stud, or something more something that sounds more like an approval. So I think
right.
this is part of the historical, the hangover of that history of how monogamy came to be our default mode of understanding romantic and sexual relationships.
But the thing is, I mean, and the way we approached marriage evolved too, right? Because as you say,
Mm-hmm.
originally it was considered more or less a financial transaction that was made
Mm-hmm.
among men, right?
Yeah,
Families would make it what was optimum for them, and there would be the passing of, a dowry or some other sort of financial asset.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
then and so as time evolved, I mean, what happened though when romantic love became part of marriage, which it wasn't necessarily a part of centuries ago?
Right. So what happens there? We still have some of the hangovers of the old way of thinking because, if you go to a wedding ceremony, the chances of the bride being given away by the father to the husband are still pretty high. And that is a direct line, from the old financial
Right.
transaction where the woman was basically a piece of property being given away by one man to another man. But what happens over time is that we start to evolve this idea that it's not meant to be status or property or inheritance that brings two people together in a marriage. It's supposed to be for love. That idea starts out, if you've read any Jane Austen, being quite radical, sort of frowned upon, romantic, right? You're not supposed to be romantic. That's impractical and leads to disaster. But that does eventually, by the middle of the 20th century, certainly by then, it's become very standard and normative that you should marry for love. And then the kind of love that would have to be becomes defined as the kind that would be monogamous, that would be permanent, that would be sexual because it would lead to having biological children together. And so we get this idea of a form of love that we call romantic love that essentially plays the role that men giving women to other men used to play, that it forms this basis of a nuclear family.
Right.
So that's pretty much what we still have, the idea that the nuclear family structure is the default chunk of a society, and love is the thing that creates the nucleus of it, makes the two parents of the two different gendered parents come together and start the nuclear family. And it's not like we think every kind of love has to be like that. And we're a lot more aware, at least in some parts of the world, that it could be two men or it could be two women, right? But we still pretty much think it has to be two, and it has to be permanent, and it has to look like the nuclear family.
And everything that we've been talking about as far as the evolution of marriage, the evolution of how we look at romantic love, it's all to do with how we as a society have decided to do this, right? It's all social constructs so far. That's all we've been talking about.
Well,
but
yes.
Exactly. But in your book, which I'm really glad that you brought up the whole biological aspect as well of romantic love. So bring that in and let's talk about the role that you feel biology plays as well.
Yeah. So this is really important to me. When I talk about love, I say that it has a dual nature, meaning, yes, there's this socially constructed idea of what romantic love should be, sort of a script that we're supposed to follow. But then there's the question of like, who's going to perform this script? What are we casting into this role? And the answer is an evolved biological animal, right? This kind of creature that we are. And the way to understand that animal is not necessarily to do a bunch of sociology or political theory. There's stuff we need to know about how we work that we can learn perhaps best by doing brain scanning or, a lot of psychology and thinking about our evolutionary past and how we've come to the point that we're at right now, as physical material beings, right? As animals. And so in that light, I want to say things like, well, there are certain kinds that we have this chemical reaction to certain people. We have, there's something real going on inside of our bodies, inside of our brains when we're falling in love with someone, let's say. And no amount of social theory is going to make that go away or stop that from happening or change the nature of it very dramatically.
Absolutely, because you can't force someone to fall in love. You can't unlove someone.
It's not a switch
those
you
things
just
happen.
press on.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Off, right. What I do think is the biological nature of love. We tend to want to attribute things to it that might not really be there. So sometimes people say, "Oh, it's very natural to be monogamous," and then other people say, "Oh, it's very natural to be non-monogamous," and they both then want to attribute that to biology or evolution. And to me, when I hear that, I hear people saying, "Well, it's very natural to have blue eyes," and then other people saying, "No, it's very natural to have brown eyes." And I want to say, no, both of these are natural. Biologically, we as a species are very varied, and we have great success. Humans have great success by being able to adapt and try different strategies for all kinds of things, including family formation, including child rearing, including bonding with one another. And so I think what we are biologically, and what's so fascinating to me about like thinking of it in those terms, what we are biologically is one species with this amazing capacity for variability and difference amongst ourselves. And so that's what I think about the biology of love.
Let me just stop you there for a sec about the biology, because isn't it, from an evolutionary standpoint, isn't it in our best interest to not be monogamous? Because we want the species. Because I'm thinking, we want to proliferate. We want the species to survive. We want to create stronger gene pools. So isn't it in our best interest to not be?
Well, so the one theory goes, and a lot of this is due to biological anthropologist Helen Fisher, that part of what is biologically or evolutionarily advantageous about monogamy is that it keeps a man and a woman together when their offspring are very young. And the way that she sees it, I'm going to quibble with some of this in a minute, but the way she sees it, our female ancestors came to a point where they'd stopped walking on all fours. They began to walk upright, so they could no longer put their baby on their back. They had to have the baby in their arms, and then they couldn't go hunting or gathering. And so they needed the man, the father of the child, to care for them and the baby, at least for a few years. And so monogamy became evolutionarily advantageous to both women and men under those circumstances, because otherwise the child wouldn't survive. And so the genes wouldn't get passed on.
Right.
Now,
but hold it. But couldn't that only just be for a short while? Because then once the child, I know.
Yeah. So, 4 years at most is all you get.
Right. We're not talking lifetime monogamy here.
No, that is, that on her theory, that's one of the downsides, that this feeling will only last you for a few years. And that's because biology's evolved it to go that way. However, what she does say is that there's another kind of love called attachment love. And that can form, that is evolved through entirely different pathways, as she sees it in the brain, works with different brain chemistry, and that can last forever. So when Fisher talks about romantic love, she's talking about actually what I would call infatuation, or that sort of early stage. It's also been called limerence, when you're just very, very excited about a person and you really get this intrusive thinking and maybe a little bit obsessive about them. So that's what she describes as romantic love, very intense, very passionate. And I think a lot of the other kind of love that she calls attachment is very romantic too. Because when you think about an old couple walking around together in their 90s, who've still, who've been attached for their entire lives since they were 20 years old, they're not going to be feeling maybe the sparkly, fizzy, oh my goodness, I must be with this person 24/7 feeling. But I think it's very romantic what they are feeling, right? So I think the way Fisher uses romantic is a bit limited. And I think her vision of what our evolutionary past may have looked like is also a bit limited and maybe informed more by current gender norms than necessarily just the pure science.
And I mean, how does sex also get tied up with romantic love?
So it becomes part of the picture for that exact reason, that the romantic bond is meant to replace the older ways of getting a marriage together. But the marriage is still supposed to be a unit of reproduction. And so people have to do whatever they got to do to make babies within that unit. And so once we think about the role that we want romantic love to play, and by we, I'm just talking about the sort of dominant social norms, not me personally, that role is supposed to include that you come together with a person, you stay with that person, you set up a household, and you bring new people into the world. So the sex is part of that picture. So that's the easiest way for most people to bring their offspring into the world.
And what do you think about that argument that is the best way to go if you're having children, that you're providing a kind of stability within that nuclear family, that you're not having people coming and going, it's two people and they're raising that child or children?
I mean, so a couple of things. Unfortunately, that's not very often what happens. So, I mean, yes, sometimes, and that's great. Stability is good for kids, but the nuclear family is not always the most stable structure, and divorce is actually very common. And even when children are very young, there is not a particular guarantee generated by monogamy or by a monogamous marriage that stability will ensue. And quite often what can happen, unfortunately, is that people will, if people do separate and then feel like they must date monogamously, there will be people coming in and out of a child's life, because those are they're doing serial monogamy, which is bringing people in and out of their lives and hence their child's lives. So I mean, the monogamous norm doesn't really particularly avoid instability in a child's early life. There's another thought that I have about this, which is that polyamorous parenthood. So I know polyamorous parents and people who are raising their children really successfully in polyamorous relationships. What it usually means, in my experience, is that there are more adults helping with the child raising. So in some examples, you could have three people, let's say, who are all in a relationship together. They decide to have a child. Now that child has three adults caring for them and loving for them and loving them and helping with everything, instead of two, which honestly, a child is so much work. Three is a better number of people to divide the tasks among than two. So just the same way that two is easier than one. So it adds an extra pair of hands. It adds extra love. And in those people's lives, it adds extra stability because the pressure placed on the parents is that much less because there's more people helping them. Other kinds of polyamory don't necessarily work like that. So sometimes you might, for example, have a couple who have a child, but they have other partners who don't live with the couple. And so then those other partners might become sort of like an auntie figure or a good friend of the family, just someone else who's helping and supporting and coming in to bring food when everything's gone wrong or do the dishes when everyone's too exhausted to do the dishes.
It strikes me almost as
like
if this is literally, the idea of it takes a community to raise a child. This is what is happening.
That's exactly what's happening. And I mean, the thing is, when people think about polyamorous relationships, we sort of, we're primed to think that it's all about sex and it's all, like big orgies are happening every night of the week. But in reality, a lot of polyamory looks a lot more like just people living as family and supporting one another and loving one another. And this is not to say, I don't mean this to sound like I'm being sex negative. That there are plenty of casual sexual relationships, monogamous and non-monogamous, and that's fine and that's very, very good. But polyamory isn't really about casual sex; it's about love. And when there is more love in a child's life, I don't see that as a bad thing, just in and of itself. And the question of stability, I think, it really boils down to how stable each of these relationships are. And for me personally, a polyamorous relationship is a lot more stable than a monogamous one could ever be. And that's because I know myself and I know that I'm not a monogamous person. So every time I've tried to be in a monogamous relationship, I would develop feelings for someone else, and then I would have to end my relationship because it was not compatible with that. So being monogamous would actually be, for me, would be intrinsically unstable. I would end up ending that relationship. Whereas being polyamorous, I know with my husband, when I have feelings for someone else, we don't have to end our relationship. So that is how I'm able to have that stability with him.
Wow. I'm just thinking about that. I almost feel as if you and your husband, that's kind of like home base that you can always go back to. Is
100%.
that right?
Yeah, that's literally how it is. I mean, he is my home base. He's who I live with and build and share my home with, and and he will be with me forever. That's
without a doubt. You know that. That is forever.
Yes. I mean, and that was part of our marriage ceremony, our commitment to one another, is that this is for our entire lives.
What happens if you meet someone though and you fall in love with that person and you want to be with that person all the time?
I mean, so there's this sort of this feeling that I mentioned before, which is the infatuation or the limerence feeling, that sort of obsessively wanting to be with someone all the time. My experience is that I can experience that, but it tends to be quite short-lived, honestly. And so I don't want to be with anyone all the time. I actually need a lot of time on my own. So there's not a, I don't see it being a reasonable expectation for myself that there's anyone I'd want to be with 100% of the time. And so that wouldn't happen. The question might be, what if there was someone else that I wanted to live with and, buy a house with or something like
Yeah,
that?
sure. Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, that kind of thing, I can't see why it would. So with Jonathan, I now have all of this history, and we have been working for 11 years to build the life together that we have. And so there's nothing that could ever replace that foundation that we've made over that length of time together. And so I know myself pretty well. I've seen myself now fall in love with other people. The idea that any of that would make me want to leave my home is alien to me. I can't imagine wanting to leave my home base.
Wow. I'd love to believe that. No, in the sense that I'd love to believe that you know yourself so well that you can actually forecast your behavior for the rest of your life. But part of me also doubts that.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me thinks, nobody knows themselves that well. There's
Nobody
always a bit
really
of us that is
does.
right? That is unpredictable.
There's always unpredictable parts of us. And you're completely right. And of course, I mean, I don't mean to pretend that I know myself better than any married person knows whether they're really going to be with that person forever. I'm telling you the reasons why I'm confident of it, but like anyone, of course, I could radically change. People sometimes do. Jonathan could radically change.
Sure.
It happens. We might grow apart. I just can't foresee that at the moment. Nothing, no evidence that I've been given gives me any reason to think that would happen. But you're right. And of course, like any marriage, there are ways that it could fall apart. I really hope that doesn't happen, but there are ways that it could. A monogamous marriage, people could very easily meet someone else and decide that they need to leave.
Absolutely.
And so
I want to go back to something that you brought up, and it's this whole idea that perception and reality about monogamy. And you were saying that, people have this intention that they are going to be with this one person for the rest of their lives, and they're going to raise their children. That's the perception they have, right? About romantic love.
Yeah.
But the reality is, what is our divorce rate? Isn't it almost 50? Isn't it about 50%?
That's the one I keep hearing. I'm not an expert on divorce
it's high. I know that it's a lot. So if it's somewhere, let's say around 50%, and that's just accounting for divorce, right. That's not even perhaps taking into account extramarital relationships, so now you throw that in.
Yeah.
Where does that really put monogamy? I always think, I wonder about that, really.
So, I wonder about that too. And I wonder how many people would choose monogamy if they knew there were other options available to them, or if they felt that other options were safe for them to investigate or explore. And, that's a very hard question to answer because so many people don't feel like they have any other options available. Although, having said that, I do notice, so I'm a professor at a university. I teach young people. I'm meeting a lot of 18 to 21-ish year olds all the time. And they know so much more than I did at their age about what is possible in love and in relationships. They have so much more vocabulary, all kinds of things. And they know so much more about themselves and gender and all of these things that flow into one another and end up kind of impacting these questions around their sexuality and how to live and how to love. And they are so much better prepared than I ever was, that I have some hope, that eventually some of this stuff is going to improve and people will be able to know themselves and know what they want and then get it.
So then let me ask you this. So the fact that they're open to it, I don't know. It strikes me too. There almost seems to be more clarity in the way they view, romantic love. So what I guess I'm wondering is, we've always had this idea, it seems that many of us have had this idea about romantic love being confusing. We
Oh,
can't
yeah.
figure it out. Let's not even try to figure it out.
Right, right, right.
And then, you have this theory that it really is based on both biology and also culture, right? On society. So let's just say that's true. So let's just say there is this duality to romantic love. Is it important that we actually tease all that out? Biology, culture, what is the true nature of romantic love? Like, do we need to do that, or can we just accept it? And maybe these young people, they just kind of accept it and they go on with their lives and they make these choices that are available to them.
I think the most important thing is for people to understand enough to be empowered in their own decision making. So the risks, as I see it, of saying that love is mysterious and magical and you shouldn't think too hard, is that people are often going to make some of their most important life decisions based on love. And whether if they're in love, they might move continents, or they might change jobs or career paths or become parents. And you should really know what you're talking about if you're making that kind of a life choice on the basis of love. So I want people to feel like they know enough and are empowered enough to think through the options with as much clarity as possible to make those decisions in a way that feels good to them, that they feel secure in, and make the right decisions, right? Not just that they feel good, but they're making good decisions for themselves.
Are you concerned at all that, you're a researcher, you're a professor, you are a proponent of polyamorous relationships, but you're also in one personally.
Mm-hmm.
So does it concern you at all to support it, but that people might see, well, she's biased because she's in it. And so that's why she's
Oh,
promoting it.
I'm biased. I'm very biased. I mean, everybody is biased to their own experience, right? So a monogamous
Yeah.
person is going to have that bias. A polyamorous person is going to have their own bias. So my way of thinking is the best thing you can do is acknowledge that you bring your own baggage to these conversations and then go from there. So nobody should listen to me imagining that I'm an entirely objective expert on the subject. But then no one should listen to anybody imagining that they're an entirely objective expert on the subject, because nobody is, right? Nobody is free of baggage, especially when it comes to love. We all have our experiences, we all have our own lives and our own preconceptions. So what's useful, I think, is to read widely, read a wide variety of opinions and perspectives. Don't just listen to me by any means. But the other thing I'd say is that I'm a proponent of polyamory for polyamorous people. What I do not think is that everyone should run out and do this, because I actually think a lot of people are monogamous people and will thrive and do best in monogamous relationships. Those people shouldn't be polyamorous. And I don't think polyamory is intrinsically better or worse than monogamy. I think it is something that it suits some people better. And I think that this is part of why I say I want people to be informed so that they can make the decision for themselves about what they want. Because I wasn't. Until I was 30, I didn't even know the word polyamory. And I only knew that if you were non-monogamous, you were a cheater and you were a terrible person. So I thought I was just a flawed individual who couldn't really do, who didn't know how to be a good lover. And now I don't think that's true. I think I know how to be a good polyamorous lover. And I'm really glad I know that about myself now. I wish I had known it sooner. So this is really the sense in which I'm an advocate for polyamory. Is I'm an advocate for giving people the option, not for everybody having to do it.
You know what? Let me just ask you one more thing too I just thought of this, because earlier on when you were talking about the history of romantic love and marriage and how its roots really were on sexual discrimination, right? Where men pretty much held the cards. Do you feel that women have more equality in polyamorous relationships?
It's hard to say that across the board, because unfortunately we do still live in a time and a place where there's a lot of misogyny, a lot of sexism in every context. And so sometimes polyamory is practiced in a way that honestly is not very sexually egalitarian, that is still quite patriarchal. But so is monogamy. So, it's pretty much on par there. There is, what I think there is that polyamorous relationships can offer a kind of a window of opportunity for a certain kind of radical resistance to patriarchy and sexism, which is in the fact that it can allow women to understand each other not as sexual competitors over men, but potentially as potentially as partners if they're queer, but also, even if they're not, as collaborators who are supporting their partners. So if I am in a relationship with Jonathan, another woman is in a relationship with Jonathan, that woman is not a threat to me. She is helping me to love and support this person I care so deeply about. And so that to me is a kind of radical way of understanding women's relationships to other women, which until I realized this was a possibility, I was always trained, I was primed, I was taught to think of other women as, potentially sexual competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of dividing of women from one another and setting them against one another is part of how patriarchy keeps women from feeling common cause with one another.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you are saying then that the women that Jonathan, your husband, dates, you do not see as a threat.
No. They are. So if Jonathan goes on a date with another woman, and I see that he comes back happy, that is a delight to me, because I want him to be happy. I know he's a non-monogamous person, and I know that he wouldn't be happy in a long-term monogamous relationship with me. So I don't want him to be in one of those, and I don't want to be in that with him either. I want him to see other people, and I want him to be fulfilled in the way that he can only be by doing that, because I love him and I want his best life. So no, they're not a threat to me. They're collaborating in this project of him getting what he needs, of care and love and excitement, and sometimes they like the kind of food that I don't like, so he can go eat it with them, or the kinds of movies that I don't want to see, he can go see with someone else.
I mean, you make it sound really great. Honestly, what's the downside? Like, what's the downside? Just so we're aware. Yeah. Like, what's the downside of polyamorous?
Utopia here. Okay. Yeah. So there's several downsides. One, obviously, if you're not a polyamorous person and you're pressured into it, you're going to have a bad time. It's not going to feel good. You'll be experiencing, jealousy, and you will see other people as a threat because to you, they essentially are. So that's a big downside if you are in a polyamorous relationship and it's not right for you. But if you are, a polyamorous person, there's still lots of issues. I mean, one is just the judgment of other people, the stigma attached to it, and the expectations. Even when people aren't explicitly judging you, there's always this expectation that everyone's monogamous, and you have to sort of navigate around that. Sometimes it's awkward explaining who someone is to you. Like if I'm with a partner, it's not my husband, and someone says, well, how do you two know each other then? I can either have a long conversation about polyamory, which I have no idea what they're going to think about that, or I can kind of lie and say, oh, it's my friend. And neither of those is easy. So there's all of that. And then, I mean, there's sort of more practical things like, honestly, time management can be a nightmare if you're trying to sort of figure out where you're spending time and who with at different times. I mean, not unlike people who have a large family and or lots of other commitments. It's similar, and it's a good problem to have, right? So many lovely people you want to spend your time with, and that it's difficult to schedule it all. That's an embarrassment of riches, but still, it is a real thing. And the other big one is learning communication skills that have to be advanced to the level where conversations that would be very awkward for most people start to feel like nothing at all. So, sometimes you have to be able to have a conversation about something intimate between you and one partner with another partner because they need to know it for some reason, right? So there's sometimes that can feel quite that can feel difficult at first until you get used to it. So being able to explain that I have feelings for someone else to my husband felt really awkward the first time. I was like, how on earth am I to navigate this? There aren't very good role models for this, right? I haven't seen on TV people showing
Right.
me how to handle that for years and years.
Yeah, yeah.
I was trying to figure it out sort of for myself with very limited advice or experience from other people around me. So that can be really hard too. Just you're constantly having to do things that you don't have a lot of role models for. There aren't really any scripts for.
Mm-hmm.
But on the plus side, the learning curve is very steep, right? So once you're in there, once you're in there doing the work, you get really good. You get really good at communicating with your partners. And honestly, being really good at communicating with your partners is very good for everything, right? Every relationship
Yeah.
can always benefit from that. So that one is a downside that comes if you push through. It comes with another upside, but it's work, and some of it feels very weird and awkward, and but I once heard someone said to me once, you won't die of awkward, and I think that's just really important.
That's good. Yeah, I like
Yeah,
that. You won't die of
you won't die
awkward.
of awkward. Yeah, people
Do you
get
know,
over it.
what do you think, I don't know, just projecting into the future, where do
Mm.
you think polyamory love, where is that going? Polyamorous relationships. What do you think?
So it's always difficult for me to answer these kinds of questions because I tend to be a bit of a pessimist, and I just think, oh no, then nothing's going to get any better. We're going to everyone's going to have to continue to feel ashamed of being polyamorous and hide it. But actually, rationally, I do see that changing over time. People are having this conversation more and more, and that kind of openness eventually is how minds get changed, because people realize, oh, those polyamorous folks aren't just some weirdos far away from me. It's actually my cousin, or it's actually my neighbor, and they just weren't telling you before. And realizing that somebody you know and respect is in this kind of relationship can really help to change people's feelings about it. And so the more we're having these conversations, the more people are willing to say, actually, yes, this is the kind of relationship that I'm in, and it works for me, and it's good. The better that will get. And I do see that changing. And so when I'm feeling optimistic, which, 2 or 3 days a week, maybe, I see us continuing in that direction, and towards a place where people are in that sort of position to choose their own adventure. So they can say, this is the kind of relationship I like and I'm
Mm,
looking for. And
hmm.
whether that's monogamy or whether it's something else.
You know what? That is so funny that you should say you tend to be pessimistic, because for me on the outside, hearing that, you are continually pursuing relationships, to me that shows a sign of intrinsic optimism that you keep on at it. Like,
I always hope, I never expect, but I always hope things will go well.
mm. Well, this was just a great conversation. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed speaking
I've
with
enjoyed
you.
this conversation very much. Thank you. You ask great questions. It's
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Carrie.
been a pleasure.
That's Carrie Jenkins. She's a professor of philosophy at the University of British Columbia. She explores the nature of love in her book, What Love Is. And she continues that exploration in her next book. It's called Sad Love. That does sound pessimistic, Carrie. But Sad Love is set to be released this summer. She's also the author of the novel Victoria Sees It. And if you'd like more info on Carrie and her work, please check out our show notes. That is it for this edition of the Cram Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Our thanks to the Temerty Foundation for their generous support. And you might also be interested in our literary podcast. It's called Passage to Wonderland. I highlight compelling passages from books that offer discovery, insight, and a sense of completion for the end of your day. You'll find Passage to Wonderland wherever you get your Cram Podcast. Thanks very much for joining us. See you next time.